that, I'm going to put it right underneath the 0. So here's a blue line that means underneath the 0. And then I'm going to put it at this edge. So now you can see that the blue lines are not just the edges, but they're other objects, like the other objects in the keypad, and also now the display rather, at the top. So I've got all these buttons. They're all sending this message, append digit. So I need to figure out which one is sending it so that I can do the right thing. So let's start writing some code inside the method. So the first thing I'm going to do is declare a local variable. This is just a local variable inside this method. And I'm going to do that by saying let digit equal. So I want this local variable to be the digit that was pressed. Okay? So first thing that's quite different here is what's let? Okay? Why isn't this var? Right? Because var means variable. What the heck does let mean? Well, let is exactly the same as var, except it's a constant, which means you're going to assign this right off the bat, and it's never going to change in this method. Now, Swift makes a big deal of this, and I love this feature. Because if I'm reading this code, I know that digit is never going to be changed. This might be, it might have a dozen lines of code, which, by the way, you shouldn't have very many methods with many more lines of code than that, okay? You want people to be able to kind of see what a method's doing. You can use other methods, call other methods if you need to get more code in there. Here I can rely on that not changing. That's big for readability. You'll be surprised how much more readable it makes the code to know that this is a local variable, but it's constant, only set at the beginning. Yeah.
Is there a reason constants and variables have the same naming conventions in Swift? Like Java, they're the naming convention is all caps. Or
yeah. So yeah, the question is, why don't I call digit all caps digit or something like that, so I know it's a constant? That would be a programming style thing. Generally in Swift, they don't do that. And I'll show you why that is in a moment, okay? Why you don't really need to do that, because you can very quickly find out the declaration of any symbol anywhere with one click, and you'll see that. Good question, though. All right, so I want to let the digit equal the number that's on the sending button. So I'm going to have to send a message to this button. Okay? I'm going to have to somehow access this button. So I'm going to have to do sender something. Give me what your title is. Okay? So this is a good time to talk about the documentation. Because being a good iOS developer really demands that you are good at navigating the documentation. Luckily, the documentation is really well plugged into Xcode. For example, if I want to find out about button, all I need to do is hold down the Option key, okay? And watch what happens now. As I mouse over things, everything, it turns blue with a dashed blue line under it, okay? If I click on it, it gives me a little blurb from the documentation about this thing. So it's saying, here's a button is a class, here's its inheritance, here's a little bit of what it does, and really awesome at the bottom here, here's a link that takes you to the detailed documentation. So I'm going to click this little link right here. It's going to bring up a documentation window with a UI button in it. Hello. Did I not click that right thing there? Oh, I hope I don't have a network issue here. Okay, well, I guess I'm not connected to the network. That's the problem. So it's getting this off the network. Okay, so imagine that there was documentation here. And it would have, along this side here on the left, all the instance variables or properties and methods of UI button. And you could click on any one, and in there would have a full description of it here, and all the types that it referenced you could click on in here, and basically it's a hyperlinked documentation system, as you can imagine. I'll try to get the networking working on Wednesday, and we'll take a look at this. But if I was looking in here, I'd look down in the section that says getting the button's current state, and I'd find that there's an instance variable or property there called current title. Okay? This is unfortunate, I'm not going to be able to link these things. But so how do we access a property or call a method in another object? Well, it looks exactly the same, whether you're calling a method or accessing a property, which is you use dot. Okay, this is the same syntax that's used in a lot of languages, is to do dot. And so when you do that, Xcode is going to say, oh, well, here's all the things button knows how to do. Okay? And as you can see, button knows how to do a lot of things because it inherits from a class that inherits from a class that inherits from a class that all have lots of methods in them. So when I looked at that documentation, I found that current title was the thing I wanted. Now notice as I start to type a C, it's already cutting down the things that could be starting with a C, and then CU, they cut down even more. I can type tab to get to the first ambiguity point. Then I can type T, okay, and then tab again. I'm here at current title, and then I can press return. Okay, so there it is, digit equals sender current title. What's going on here in terms of sender title? Let's go ahead and print this out to the console just to see what's going on. So I'm going to print len, which is a function, a global function, that takes a string, so I give it a string. And inside that string, I'll type digit equals. And now I want to embed the value of digit in this string. And Swift has a really cool feature, which is backslash, open parentheses, close parentheses. If you put that in a string, and then inside there you put some expression, then it will evaluate that expression, turn it into a string, and embed it in this string. Okay? So it's really easy to println values by using this backslash parentheses. Okay? So let's go ahead and run and see what happens when we press these buttons, see what kind of result we get. It's not going to be quite what we expect, but let's see. All right, so here's our UI. We've got our buttons. That's a good start. And now, and the console, where's the console? Watch this. I'm going to press a button, 5. The console appears at the bottom here. See this down here? This is the console. And it's saying digit equals, optional 5. Okay, how about a 9? They're all optional. What the heck is going on here? Okay, this is crucial to understanding Swift. This is probably the most important thing to understand that people don't quite get right from the start. So we're really going to focus here on understanding what optional means right there. Okay, so let's go back to our code and look at this. Oh, and by the way, when the console appears down here, you can make it go away with this little button, or you can just drag it out of the way. Okay, but sometimes it's nice to have that console still there so you can look at your output while you're, reacting to whatever you found. In fact, we will leave that there so you can see the optionals. All right, so what's going on here? Well, what's happening here is, well, first of all, don't you find this a little bit odd? Let digit, I didn't put a type. You see that? What type is digit? Okay, there's no type in there, no type information whatsoever. So does Swift have untyped variables? No, it's the exact opposite. Swift is very strongly typed, okay? All variables have a type. You have to specify a type. But Swift is also incredibly good at what's called type inference. So we can infer the type from the context. So here, I let digit equal whatever this is, this current title, and so it just made digit be the same type as this, okay? Now, back to the question earlier, so what type is that? Well, if I hold down option, okay, just like we used option to go look into the documentation, we can also option click on our own variables to see, are they constant, are they variables, and what type are they? So watch this. Option click, it says digit is of type string question mark. Okay, string question mark. That question mark means optional. So there is a type in Swift, it's a type called optional. Okay? Optional, that type, can have only 2 values. One value is not set. Okay? This optional is not set. Either it has never been set or someone set it to the not set state. They unset it, if you want to think about it that way. So optional, one value is not set. We call that, there's a symbol for it in here called nil, N-I-L. Okay, that means not set. That's the value of an optional, not set. That's the only thing nil means in Swift is option. This is an optional, the value of an optional that's not set. What's the other value that an optional can have? Well, the other value is something. It's set to something, okay? And the type of that something is what is specified next to the question mark, string. So really, you can almost think of the question mark there, that's the type, optional. And that string to the left is just saying, if this optional is set, what type of thing is it set to? In this case, a string. So we would call this an optional string. But it's really an optional. It's not a string that can be nil. It's an optional that can be a string. Everybody cool with that sentence? That's an important sentence to understand. Okay? So this got to be an optional because this current title method right here returns an optional string. Let's look at that. So I'm going to option down here, click. Look at this. This is the documentation for it. It's a instance variable, a property on UI button. Name is current title. The type is string question mark. And this little get means it's read only. I can only get the current title. I can't set it. There are other ways to set a button's title. You can't set it with this method or this property. So it's an optional. So that's why this ended up being an optional. All right. Well, that's all wonderful. How do I get the string? I don't want an optional. I want that button's string. And the way you do that is you unwrap the optional, meaning you look in there and get the associated value with exclamation point. Okay, what happens if I put that exclamation point there? Well, first of all, let me show you that when I put that exclamation point, look what happened to digit. I'm option clicking on digit. It's not an optional anymore. Digit turned into a string because I unwrapped the optional that came back from current title and got the string out of there. But what happens if this is nil? What happens if this optional is nil? In other words, the button title has never been set. Crash. Okay? Crashes your program. So if you use exclamation point to unwrap an optional, and that optional's current value is not set, nil, then it will crash your program. Now, a lot of you might be like, whoa, my programs are going to be crashing all over the place. And because there's a lot of optionals in iOS. I mean, a lot. Okay, most things are probably optionals because most things, it makes sense they could be in a not set state at some point. And yeah, in this case though, maybe you want your program to crash. Okay? You might want your program to crash because if you had a button that never had its title set and it's sending a pen digit to your controller, you probably want to have that crash so you can find that bug before you ship your program. You see why sometimes crashing is good? Now, if you don't want to crash, there's a way to get around that as well, and I'll show you that a little bit later. But for now, understanding that that's what this exclamation point does. It unwraps that optional and crashes if it's nil. But if it's not nil, it gets to the string, or whatever the optional type is, out of there for you. So now let's go ahead and run again. And we're going to see that digit equals is going to say the number. Okay, it's got the string off the current title. No more optional in there. Okay? Good. All right. So now what are we going to do with that digit? We got the digit. We want to append it onto the end of this display right here. Okay? And so let's just do that by saying display dot. Now, again, if we have the documentation, I'd go look in the documentation and it would say, oh, there's a property on UI label, which is what display is. Display is a UI label. There's a property in it called text. See it right there? And actually, you can even see right here the type of that. It's an optional as well, because this label's text might not have been set either. Okay? So it has to be an optional string. Okay? So I'm just going to set that equal. Now, display.text is an optional, so what values can I send it to? Set it to. I could set it to nil. That'd be legal because it's an optional. See? No warnings, no errors. That would clear out that display. It would not be set to anything. Or I can set it to a string because it's an optional string. So I'm going to set it to a string, and the string I'm going to set it to is display.text, what's currently in there, plus digit. Okay? So I'm going to append that digit on. Let's get rid of that. Okay? Now, this has an error here. Why does this have an error? Anyone volunteer why this is an error? See, it's pointing right here. There's an error. Back there.
The display.text is an optional string.
Bingo! Because display.text right here is not a string. It's an optional. And you can't add a string to an optional. You can only add strings to other strings. So we need to turn this into a string by unwrapping it. And again, yes, this would crash if the display currently has nothing in it. It's not set. Okay? Everybody cool with that? So let's run again. All right, so now 5, oh, it put the 5 on there. 6, excellent, it's kind of working. I don't really like that 0 though. That's kind of weak, 0, 5, 6. That 0 should have gotten cleared out, right, when I first typed that 5. And that's because we really need some way in our controller to know whether we're in the middle of typing a number right now. Because if we're in the middle of typing a number, we want to append. But if we're not in the middle of typing a number, we want to start a new number, right? So let's do that. And I'm going to do that by adding a property, okay? Var user is in the middle of typing a number, which you might say, oh my God, that's a terrible variable. Now I have to type that over and over. This is the last time I'll ever have to type that, okay? Because Xcode is always going to escape complete it for me. Okay, so long names are perfectly fine in terms of typing load anyway. So I like this name, so I'm going to keep it. And it's a bool, okay? So I'm typing, it's giving its type. So here's var, name, type. And notice, look at this little error right here, okay? Okay, sometimes you're going to get errors in Swift that are completely incomprehensible to you because you haven't learned enough of Swift. This one's kind of like that. You see it says class view controller has no initializers. And that's because, and pay attention, in Swift, all properties have to be initialized when the object is initialized, okay? You can't have a property just sitting around not initialized. They have to have a value. Now, if they're an optional, their value could be nil, but they have to have some value. So we can't have this have no value. Now, there's 2 ways to give it a value. One is with an initializer. Unfortunately, I'm not going to teach that to you until next week, so you can't do it that way. Another way is just to say what it equals right here. Okay? And boom, get rid of all our errors. Obviously, we don't start out in the middle of typing a number, so we're good to go here, right? So now we know whether the user's in the middle of typing a number. We can go down here and say if the user, now again, I'm just going to hit tab to jump past this, maybe a couple times. But if the user is in the middle of typing a number, then we'll do what we were doing before. Otherwise, we're just going to set the display.text equal to the new digit we just typed, okay? And we're going to say that the user is now in the middle of typing a number. Question?
Why would we have to do with display initialize?
Why did we not have to initialize this? That's a fantastic question, and I'm going to talk about that on Wednesday because there's only 1 minute left. But that is a great question, and it also, when I talk about it, I'm going to tell you why this is an exclamation point and not a question mark. Because I told you that optionals are made with question marks. So why the heck is this optional? Because that's what it is, an exclamation point. So we'll talk about that next time. All right, so let's go ahead and run one last time here. And hopefully this 0 will be cleared out. It is, and hopefully this will continue to append. It is. So we're in a great spot right here. We've got a calculator. We can enter numbers in it. Next step is we got to make it do some calculating. And we're going to do that next time. So I will see you then.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu. Stanford University.
All right, well, welcome to Stanford CS 193P winner of 2015. This is lecture number 2. Apologize up front for my terrible voice. We're going to try and get through this as best we can today. Our topics are twofold. We're going to continue the calculator demo that we started in last lecture. And then we're going to have some slides about this model view controller object-oriented design pattern that we're going to use in everything we do when we build applications in this class. All right, so let's get started with that demo. Again, here's a slide with a summary of kind of the important things we're going to talk about. You don't need to read those in advance here. It's more for reference. My slides in general, I post them. It's mostly intended to almost be note-taking for you, to be able to go back and try and figure out, whoa, what did he talk about that day? Oh, yeah, what's important, et cetera. So my slides do tend to be a little bit dense. I tend to put a little more on them than just bullet items. But that's because I want you to be able to look back and kind of get just a little bit more depth to remind yourself what I talked about. Okay? All right, so this demo, if you'll remember last time where we left off, we had gotten the keypad fully working. All right, and we were talking a little bit about properties and instance variables and how we had to initialize them. And someone asked a question right at the end of lecture, perfect timing. What about the little outlet that we dragged out, that display UI label exclamation point? How come we didn't have to make that equal to something to start? And that's where this demo is going to pick up. Okay?
Okay, well, let's dive back into this demonstration where we left off, which was this line of code here. And we had just talked about the fact that we have to initialize all of our variables in a class, in any class. And so that's why we need this equals false here. We wanted the equal false too, but we needed it. And yet it didn't seem like we needed one here. And why was that? Well, it turns out that this right here, even though it doesn't quite look like one, is an optional. And optionals automatically get equal nil given to you. So you don't have to actually put the equals nil here. So that's why, so this one is getting initialized. It's just being done automatically for you. But let's talk about the look of this thing. It's got this exclamation point here. And if it were an optional, you'd be used to it having a question mark. For example, when we look at this optional right here, current title, you see it's string question mark, not exclamation point, question mark. So what's the difference between a question mark and an exclamation point here? And the answer is it makes no difference to the actual type. It's still an optional whose value here could be a UI label. But it matters on the usage of it. And this is purely just kind of compiler helping you out thing here. But if we look, when I change this to a question mark, you see that some errors appear down here. So let's click on one of these errors like this one, and you can see the error is that UI label question mark does not have a member name text. In other words, you can't send text to a UI label question mark, which is what this is. And that makes sense because UI label question mark is an optional, and obviously optional doesn't respond to text. UI labels do, but optionals don't. So why are we getting this error now when we weren't getting it before? And how do we get rid of this error? Well, we could certainly get rid of this error by just putting an exclamation point here. That would unwrap this optional. And now this would be a UI label right here. We can send it text. And we can do the same thing up here. We can unwrap it there, and we can unwrap it there. And that gets rid of all our errors. But this is kind of an interesting property in that even though it's not initialized at the very beginning of our class's creation, it starts out as nil, not set. As soon as this user interface over here gets loaded up by this view controller, then this gets wired up, right? So that gets wired up, and this is set, and then it's set forever. So it's really kind of would be sad if we actually, every time we used it, had to unwrap it all the time. So these kind of properties that get set very early, maybe not right at creation like this one, but they get set very early and then they stay set all the time. You can, instead of putting a question mark in their declaration, we're talking about their declaration here, you can put an exclamation point. And what that says is, this is just an optional, but always automatically unwrap it so that you don't have to put this exclamation point in here. So if I take this exclamation point out, you can see it's not generating any errors, and it's still going to unwrap this display and turn it into a UI label. And it's still going to crash your program if for some reason the display were nil. If you tried to execute this code, it may be impossible because this is the button sending this, so the button wouldn't be here if this hadn't gotten already loaded up and set. But if somehow you had some place in your controller where you were accessing display before this UI got loaded, it would crash because it is unwrapping this. It's just that you don't have to put the exclamation point. It's kind of like auto exclamation point. And this is called an implicitly unwrapped optional. Okay, implicitly unwrapped optional. And it's really only useful for this kind of property that's set very early and then stays set forever. So it's kind of syntactic sugar, really. Okay, so let's move on to the next button in our UI right here, which is going to be an enter button. Now, our calculator does not have an equals sign, so you're probably used to calculators where you say 6 plus 3, and then when you hit equals, it shows you the result. This calculator, a little more like a scientific calculator, has an enter key. And so instead, you put the numbers you want to add or divide or multiply or whatever onto a stack, and then when you press the operation keys, it pulls them off the stack. So that looks like this: 6 enter 3 times, or 6 enter 3 enter times. So the times is going to pull the 6 and the 3 off the stack. Or you could even go 6 enter 5 enter 4 enter, and then go times plus, and that would multiply the top two on the stack and then add the last one on. So we need an enter key here for our calculator. Now I'm going to create that enter key in a way that's actually going to cause a problem for me in a moment, but I want to show you how to resolve that very problem. So I'm going to create this enter key by copying and pasting this digit key right here. And I'm just going to put it in here. Notice how I'm lining these blue lines up absolutely perfectly. I don't want them to be, you know, like it's lined up with that one, but not that one, or vice versa. I want them perfectly lined up, because later I'm going to spread these out over the whole UI. And if I haven't lined these up just absolutely perfectly, then Xcode's not going to quite know what I want here in terms of the relationship between these. All right, so we don't want a 3 on here. We want to have a enter symbol. So I'm going to go up here to special characters. This is on in most Mac applications. You can go to the edit menu and get special characters. And I'm going to search for this one actually. I think it's called a return. Yeah, and these are just Unicode characters right here. And so I want this one that looks like kind of like a return key or an enter key. So I have this, and I'm going to use the same mechanism we used before, which is control drag. So I'm just going to control drag out here, and we're creating an action, of course, because we want this button to send us a message. I'm going to call it enter, because that's what it is, the enter key. Now one thing that's different about this one, if you remember when we wired this action up, we had the button who was sending it as an argument, and we don't want that this time because there's only one enter key. We don't really need to talk back to the enter key, so we're going to say none right here. So it also doesn't really matter about this type because we're not going to have an argument, so it doesn't matter what this type is. So let's connect that. You can see right here we have enter, and it has no arguments. Now, what are we going to do inside enter? Well, the main thing we need to do is put whatever number is in this display up here, okay, onto our internal stack. So we're going to need an internal stack in a moment here. Another thing we might want to do is set users in the middle of typing a number to false, because we might have been typing a number, but as soon as we hit enter, we're putting it on the stack. Next time we type a digit, we're going to be starting a new number. All right, so we'll call that user is in the middle of typing a number false there. Now, let's go ahead and actually run this and see how this is working, because there's going to be a little problem here. I'm just going to run this. All right, so let's try 8, enter. Oh, well, what's that? Not good. 6, enter. Well, it's kind of working because and after we press enter, the user is in the middle of typing number, starts over, so that's good. But I had no intention for this to be showing up on the end of my display, this little enter key. So what the heck is going on there? Why is that happening? So let's take a look here. The problem here has to do with the messages being sent. So when we wired this up, that's good. We got enter. The problem is that button also sends a pen digit. And that's because we copied and pasted this 3, remember? And the 3 sends a pen digit. And so when we copy and pasted it, now this one sends a pen digit. So it sends both. Okay, it's sending 2. Now, that's a common mistake to make. You know, you didn't really think about that when you copy and paste it. How do we fix this? Well, if you right-click, so I'm going to right-click on this button, you'll get this window that comes up, and it shows you all the connections from this UI element to your code. And you can see here, both append digit and enter are connected. Now the great thing is I can just click this little X right here and it'll take this connection away. So now I only have enter. So now if I go back here, see, it's not sending append digit, it is sending enter. And you can do this right clicking for anything, like we can even do it for our label up here. We can see there's the display connection that we have right here. So yeah, don't forget right click to disconnect things. Now, if you forget about this and you don't do it, or maybe you have it wired up to some thing that you changed. For example, if we had accidentally put an argument here to enter, if we had made it do the sending button